welcome back to week 4 of our online class where we've been diving into our Numb series and talking about mental health. We're really excited to be with you tonight. This is our last night together, so we're kind of sad at the same time. We've really enjoyed this series and we hope that you have too. We hope you've found it helpful and that you've been able to apply a lot of the things that we've been talking about to your own lives and begin to take some steps towards healthier mental health. So tonight we're going to hear one last message from Kelsey, and then Dustin and Carrie and I will be back for a conversation afterwards where we will hopefully give you some tips towards better mental health towards the end of the class. So thank you guys so much for joining us, and we'll be back in just a few minutes.
Welcome back to our final week of our online class. Super excited that you've been doing this journey with us, and it's been tough at times. We've had to be really honest and raw with where we're at. Today we're going to talk about what we do now. We've processed through a lot. Now we're going to actually deal with it. The incredible thing is that when God built us, when he created us, he built us into community. He built us intentionally to do life together. And so while we may be sitting alone behind a screen on another end, we're not actually meant to do it by ourselves. We're meant to connect with the people around us. So how do we do that? And I think sometimes when it comes to things like mental health, we get so timid, so fearful of what we're going to say, or if we're going to say things wrong or right, or if we're going to talk to the right person, or if we're going to confront people, what does that actually look like? And so when it comes to dealing with our stuff, we just don't. We just let people think we're perfect. So how do we process that? How do we get over that? For me, I have had multiple moments where I've been confronted, where I've had people confront me, where I've had moments that go incredibly well because I chose the right person to talk to. And I've had moments where I'm talking to someone about an issue in my own life and they're sobbing because they're overwhelmed and it was too much for me. And I realized I talked to the wrong person. So how do we make those assessments? I remember in college, my senior year, I had this roommate. She's incredible. Like even now, she's like overachiever to the max. She was graduating college a year early. She was incredible at singing. She was incredible with the guitar and piano. She could talk circles around anyone about scripture. She knew her life plan, her life goal. She was incredible. She was an RA on the floor, which meant she was in charge of a whole section of girls. And I got to live with her and kind of be the fun, weird aunt that lived down the hall was kind of the role I played. And we had an incredible time that year, but we actually didn't know each other very well. We kind of got thrown into this roommate situation. And there was one day, and I was in the middle of this season of acknowledging that maybe something's not going so well in my life. And so I was kind of in a weird spot myself, and I didn't really tell her a whole lot of what was going on. But there was one day in particular, we were writing papers for the end of the first semester, and I began to hear behind me that there's something, some commotion, and it sounds terrifying. And I turn around and I find her kneeled over the couch, and she can't catch her breath and she can't figure out what's going wrong. And she just looks at me, and all she can get out of her mouth is, "Kelsey, help." And I'll be honest, I remember the feeling in that moment of looking at her and going, I don't know what to do. And if you've ever been there with your friend who's walking through a weird season, you don't know what to do. And to be fair, you're not necessarily supposed to. And I just sat there kind of frozen for a second. And when I'm not qualified, and again, I'm not qualified to help her through this. And so as I'm looking at her, I finally just kind of take a deep breath and I go, God, I need you to be in this one because I don't know how to address this. I've worked with students for years, but my friend, this is different. So I say, what do you need from me? Which was probably the most brilliant thing I could say, which definitely means God has built us for community and he is in those relationships. And she just says, I need to get out of this room. And so we go, and I say, do you want me to drive or do you want to drive? And she was not in a position to drive. And so I drove, even though that caused me a little bit of anxiety in that moment. And we just drove, and we drove to the beach, and we just sat and looked at the beach and just sat in silence. And I had no words to say, and it turns out that was exactly right. On the drive home, and while we lived close to the beach in California, everything takes an hour and a half. No matter where you're going, this drive, hour and a half drive back, I continued to wait. And at some point she goes, I think I'm dealing with some anxiety. And I just kind of nodded along. I wasn't sure if she was done. And she said, I think I need more help. I was like, that might be true. And she continued to process. And I opened up a little to her about, I need some help too. And not just going to therapy. I need to actually try, and I need some accountability in my life to try. What if we go at the same time? So we did. For the next 9 months, we went to therapy together every single Friday. We would take turns on who was driving based on who had a worse week, and we knew we were going to be a mess when we left. And we would drive home in silence, and we'd get back to the room, and we'd just sit, and we would just be silent, and then we'd open up. And I began to realize there isn't fear around talking to people. It may feel that way, it may feel heavy, but there's actually incredible beauty in sharing in one another's story, in sharing in one another's burden, in sitting next to each other and not saying a single thing, not trying to solve it, not trying to be their therapist, because that's what therapists are for, but just being. For Paul, there's this incredible relationship that he has with this church, and he started this church in Philippi. But what we actually begin to see is it's not just him leading them. They actually build this friendship and this camaraderie, and this church has an opportunity to sit next to Paul in the middle of his situations, in the middle of him being imprisoned. And there becomes this beautiful dynamic between them where they're sharing in life together. In fact, towards the end of his letter to the church, in chapter 4, verse 14 through 16, he says, "Yet it was kind of you to share in my trouble." Just think about that. Like, this is Paul talking to this church, and he says, "Yet it was kind of you to share in my trouble." Like, Paul, the leader of the church at this point in history, this guy who has all the answers, and he's saying, it was kind of you to share in my trouble. He's supposed to have the answers, and yet he's experiencing grief too. It is okay for us to experience that and to acknowledge that and to acknowledge we need people. And then for this church to say, I'm actually going to participate. He continues and said, "And you Philippians yourselves know that in the beginning of the gospel, when he first started, when he left Macedonia, no church entered into partnership with me in giving and receiving except you only. Even in Thessalonica, you sent me help for my needs once and again." Over and over and over again, Paul talks about this church that while he was in chains, they sent him this guy named Epaphroditus, and he came and he served Paul. He fed Paul. He took care of Paul. And then Epaphroditus got sick, and so then Paul and Timothy were taking care of him while he was sick. And there's this joint unity. And anytime Paul was on a missionary journey and he needed help, the church in Philippi knew. And again, this church was not supposed to be the church that was highly successful. They were a bizarre group of humans, and yet they wanted to share in his life. So if you're wondering, who can I trust? It's people that want to share in your life, not people that want to tell you how to do your life, not people that are going to make it about themselves, but want to share and have proven over and over and over again. This church has proven before this section in the letter over and over and over again. They've shown up for Paul before he even asks. Those are the people you talk to. The people who, when you get in their presence, you feel a sense of peace because they've always been there, even if you've never shared something with them. And then what do you do when people come to you and they need help? Share. Offer support. Sometimes stop talking. Sometimes share the wisdom that God has for them. But ultimately, share. Be together. Experience life together, which means there's someone you need to call right now. Text them. Set up a coffee appointment with them and say, "Listen, I just trust you, I value you, and I want to grow together. I want to share in some life things with you." Maybe there's someone in your life, and this was me for many years. I needed someone to notice that something was wrong. Maybe there are people in your life that the moment I said that, you're like, yeah, there are. Text them. Hey, let's sit down. Let's talk. Let's share in life. And when someone invites you to coffee, just be there. Listen. Experience that moment together, because it makes a world of difference. What started out as my roommate having this crazy panic attack ended up in the two of us finding a friendship that allowed both of us to be vulnerable. And I'll be honest, I'm not great at it. And so it's going to take risk. And I was so incredibly grateful that this friend took a risk on me so that we could share together. Who do you need to text right now? Go do it.
Hey, welcome back, everybody. So good to be with you guys this evening for our last online class. I'm Dustin, this is Liz, and this is Carrie. If you're just joining us for the first time today, you picked a good one to jump in. We're going to talk about some really practical next steps and what it looks like to kind of maintain and cultivate our mental health. We've talked about the stages of change that we can go through as we start to discover more about our problems and issues and stuff that maybe is holding us back from living the life we would like to live. And the first few stages of those, you can go back and find more information, but basically pre-contemplation, before we know about our issues or anything that's going on, maybe in our head, we're living it out, but we may not know about it, we may not be aware of it. And then contemplation, once we start to recognize some pattern in our life or some past thing that's affecting us. And then once we recognize it, we can start to plan what we want to do about it, and then take action and maintain that action. And so today we're talking kind of, as we did last week, a little bit about action and maintenance. So Carrie, what do you want to say about that?
I think what Kelsey was saying is really important, that we have to realize that we get to the point, we know we have a problem, we can identify what it is, we start to get some practical steps on how to take care of it. But the thing is, we know that we weren't created to do things alone. We are made for community. God made us for community, and even more so in our brokenness, even more so in our hurt. And so when we're starting to think about what's the next step with, now I know what's going on, but now I kind of need my people. I need to get that support. I need that community. I need to be honest about it and open. Anybody who has done any work with AA or NA, they know that that's one of the first steps, admitting that there's a problem, admitting that there's something going on. And it's really important that we find a way to do that with trusted people.
So what are some ways that you can recommend people start to take action, like within finding their people? What are some ways that they can do that? And what are some things that you recommend for them, or maybe the person who already has people? What are some next steps practically that people can start taking?
Sure. I think there are going to be people watching this right now that are like, I have my people, I know who they are. I know the people I can trust and that I can go to, but I'm hesitant. I'm afraid of what they're really going to think of me. Maybe if they knew this part of me that's broken, maybe if they know this part of me that's hurt, this part of me that's my underlying issue, maybe they're not going to want to be around me anymore. Maybe they're not going to want to be involved in my life. Maybe this thing is going to make them turn running. And so if you already have your people, here's the thing I really would encourage you to do is stand in their place. If the person that you love and care about, that's involved in your life, were to come to you and say, I've got this thing. This is really hard for me to talk about. I've been working on it personally, but I really need some support and I need to share it. Chances are, if you were on the other side, you would still go, well, we all have stuff, right? We all have things. Thank you for sharing that with me. Thank you for being vulnerable. It's when we let those walls down that we are vulnerable and we have better connection. So a lot of times when we have things that we're struggling with, issues, we put the walls up to protect ourselves, and we can be surrounded by people but be very lonely. And that's not where we want you to be. We want you to be brave, and we want you to reach out to those people. And that's for the ones that can say, right now I can think of my people. I know who's safe, but I know who I've not talked to about this. But you might be in a situation where you're like, I don't have people. I don't, and I don't know what to do. So the first step in that, I would say, is if you're dealing with something really difficult and you've identified it, you're ready to do some change, you're ready to do some work on it, you're in a good place to start that. Or honestly, even if you're not, but you do want to start working, I would say this is where it's really important to find a trusted counselor. So we have recommendations here. I am one of the therapists here. I am one of the people that they recommend. And here's the thing. If you don't come to me, that's fine. You have to go to somebody you feel comfortable with, that you can build a good rapport with. And at the end of the day, that's what any, hopefully, good counselor wants. So you find someone you can connect with, that you can build that good rapport and you can feel safe. Beyond that, we actually here at Eastern Hills offer a lot of ways for people to connect and to find more of that inner circle. A therapist is great, but they're not going to be like your best friend. It's not the person you can go to at 3 a.m. And you need to have the people you can go to at 3 a.m. You need to have the people that you can go to just at any moment. And so we have a lot of opportunities here. We were talking about that. One that I'm connected with is Soul Care. We're going to start Soul Care up again this upcoming, not tomorrow, but the first Wednesday in February. So the first and third Wednesday of every month, we're going to meet from 6:30 to 7:30. And it's just a time for us to kind of talk about issues in mental health. We kind of hit it in a broad way, and then we sort of narrow down in, and we allow people to share their experience and to offer support to one another. And the feedback I kept getting last time was, it's so nice to know I'm not alone. I'm not the only person dealing with this. And you're not.
Yeah.
So that's a great place to come and make some connections. And so that is one way. And Liz, you were talking about a couple other ways.
Yeah, I think just knowing that you're not alone is such a powerful thing.
Yeah.
And we have other ways to connect by joining into a community group. We have lots of community groups here. It's a great way to build community and find your people that you can do life with, people that you can share with, and a place where you feel like you're not alone. And it takes a little bit of time to build that relationship. And again, I think we were discussing this before we came on, and it's just so important to be vulnerable and to be willing to dive in deep and share. I think because you kind of get, like, out of community, you get into it, get out of it what you're going to put into it, right? So if you show up and you're not willing to share, you're not willing to open up, or you're physically showing up, but like mentally you're not showing up, you're not really going to get a whole lot out of it. So I think we talked about that. It's just so important to show up, to be vulnerable, and to share. So that's a great way. Community groups are another great way to connect. And then we also have Financial Peace University. We talked about in week 1, maybe finances are your thing, or we talked about watching where your resources are going when you're identifying your problem, and maybe you're spending money in ways that maybe aren't the most responsible, or you're having trouble with a budget or whatever that looks like. It's a great class to jump into to learn budgeting and to learn what does Dave Ramsey say about like telling your money where to go and instead of your money telling you where it's going. So I think that's been really helpful for me and my husband in our own budgeting. So I would recommend that class too, and that starts next week as well. Yeah.
So we've looked kind of at some ways people can find their close friends, or maybe if they're in a little bit more of a difficult situation, to go find a therapist or a counselor. What would you say for the person who's kind of following along with us this month, maybe has worked through some of their stuff, and then we're heading into February, we're not in mental health series anymore, we're not talking about this on the online class anymore, and they get a couple weeks in and start to feel like they're hitting some stumbling blocks or missing some things. What would you say to that person?
I would say you are super normal. This is super common, We get into areas where we're really making a lot of progress. We've got momentum. We're doing really well. And then we hit a bump. I think anybody who's ever tried to lose weight can say, oh, I totally can relate to that, right? I mean, that's just any discipline that you try to put into your life, you're going to hit bumps. When I have worked in areas with people with addiction, the idea is we know they're going to relapse at some point. We need to be there for them and support them. You try really hard not to. It's most likely going to happen, but it's not the end of the world, right? So we were talking a little bit before this that, let's say that you took 5 steps forward, but you fell back one day. Well, you still have taken 4 steps forward. That's progress. You're not going to be perfect. Nobody is going to be perfect. And to be able to embrace that and say, yeah, there's going to be bumps, there's going to be hard times, but that doesn't mean that I have to throw it all away. We kind of chatted over the example of if we looked at a day in terms of dollars instead of hours. So if you get $24 and 5 of those hours, 5 of those dollars, you're messing up. You're not focused. You're not doing the things that you should do. Well, it would be really dumb for a person to go, well, that's it. Just take the other 19, forget it. This is just, nobody would do that, You're not thrilled about the $5 getting lost, but there's still more. There's still more than there isn't. So don't look at your life differently. If you've made so much progress, be thankful in that. Focus more on that. And that's another big thing too. Let's be solution focused. Let's be looking at the positive. We can always look at the negative. It's human nature. But we talked about making those paths in our brain. So let's start with that. You know, we're starting to go down that negative path again. Nope, I'm going to stop. I've made so much progress. I'm so much further along than I was a couple months ago. I am doing well. I hit a bump. I'm not going to let this change everything.
Yeah, give yourself grace in the process.
Absolutely.
We were talking earlier about shame being a big reason why people won't find their people, why people won't reach out. Do you want to touch a little bit more on what that is and how that really holds people back?
Yeah. So, you know, I really think that we get this idea in our head of whatever our thing is. And just to kind of give more of a practical example, we talked about knowing people in our lives who have had abortions, and they're like, you know, here I am supposed to be this godly person, and I've done this thing, and I feel so much shame and guilt about this that I can never work past this. I could never tell anybody. What would people think of me? So the great news is, that we talked about before, is the secret's out, because God knows. So when we start to come to terms with that, it starts to give us the freedom to come to terms with that with other people. And that goes back to, you know, when somebody approaches you with something difficult, if these are your safe and trusted people that we've talked about, ways to build that up and to feel comfortable and to know, you know, this is somebody that's been there for me that I can trust, chances are they're not going to run screaming. You know, they're not going to look at this like, well, now you're just a completely different person to me. Now, sometimes in certain situations, they may say, I need some time to process this. But give them grace in that too. You know, they're taking that in. That doesn't mean that I need time to process this and we're never going to talk again. It might truly mean I need time to kind of digest that, but I'm still here for you. And sometimes you're met with such a different response too. Shame can be this monster that we hold inside. We hold this inside of our head, and it's like this horrible, terrible thing, and we get it out and we go, oh, that's much more manageable than I thought it was. And so we don't want to allow things and circumstances to define us, because God doesn't do that. So if we're going to live that out, then we need to be able to say, I'm going to let go of this. I'm going to let people in because I need healing, and I am designed to gain healing from my community.
And let's talk about a little bit of healthy examples of community, because I think if you're in a place that's tough and you need to find your people, sometimes it can be easy for those relationships to become codependent, or where you're trying to use the people to fill the void or fix kind of the issue that you're facing. And so what are some red flags, or what are some ways that people can kind of work through that a little bit, so that the people that's supporting maybe can look for that and recognize codependency, and then also kind of helping the people seeking out community, that they can find healthy boundaries and kind of healthy relationships within that for support.
That's a great point. I think when we are in a vulnerable place and we let people in, we can end up in the area of codependence. And what that is when we're saying, well, I can't get through a day without this person. Like, I can't do anything. I can't make decisions without this person. And all of a sudden, codependence truly, in my opinion, is allowing that person to take the place of God. So when we are turning more to that person, when we're turning more to them, when we're caring more about their opinion and what they think than what we're caring about what God thinks of us, what God says about us, that's your red flag. And I'm so sorry, because I'm going to give a resource and we didn't talk about it ahead of time, but the book Boundaries by Cloud and Townsend. It's a wonderful, wonderful thing to kind of have on hand. I recommend that to everybody, because it's okay to have boundaries. And it's okay if you start sensing those red flags to say, okay, I still want this person in my life, right? Let's not be black and white. Either they're all in or they're not. No, it doesn't have to be that way. But let's find a really healthy way to set up the boundaries. Let's find a healthy way to say, yes, I want you as part of my life, and this part, you don't have to be involved in all the way. So, and that's not being secretive, that's having boundaries. You know, you're secretive if there is shame, if there's, I don't want them to know about this, as opposed to, no, this is a part of my life that can be just for me. This is a part of my life. And to not have shame and guilt surrounding that. So if anybody is struggling with codependency or anything like that, I would say Boundaries by authors Cloud and Townsend is a great one, a great resource for anybody in any relationship, just to know I'm allowed to have boundaries. I'm allowed to hold to them. Doesn't make me a bad person. In fact, it makes me a really healthy person.
And I would say, to reference back to shame too, Kurt Thompson is an excellent reference for shame, and he has a book called The Soul of Shame. So that's another great one to dive into as well, if you're kind of dealing with some shame stuff, to kind of work through that. So, yeah.
No, I think the boundaries conversation is really helpful. I think part of this obviously is the person who would say, yeah, I kind of need to take a bigger step into community, or a bigger step into taking responsibility for my mental health and taking steps to grow. But then also, of course, there's going to be people who are trying to help their friends work through some of that stuff. You may be, even at the same time, working through your own stuff, and someone may be coming to you and going, hey, I need help with this. And it's okay to do both, I think, at the same time.
It is, yeah. And that was a great example in Kelsey's story, when she was talking about her and her roommate. You know, they were both going through things, and they were able to lean on one another. But I really think that to talk to her, that there would be, but we knew, like, there were times when we were like, this might not be a good area for us to go to, just the two of us, because we're both struggling. And to know that, and that's a great point. Maybe you are in a really good place. Maybe you're the one that's helping the friend. Maybe you are the first point of community for them. And it can be overwhelming, right? To feel like you have to take on all of it. So that's another reason why the boundaries is so important. Healthy boundaries, because you can say, I absolutely want to help you, but that doesn't mean that you have to be available 24/7. We talk about the 3 a.m. phone call. If that happens every once in a while, hey, it happens. We all need that. We all have points in our lives when we need that. If it's happening every night, if it's happening every week, that's not okay. That's not healthy. And then that is a codependence. That's them saying, I can't do this on my own at all. I need you to do this with me. And there's a very big difference between, let me walk alongside of you and hold on to your hope until you're able to take it back, as opposed to, I'm going to take this for you forever, and you need me. And there are some people who thrive on that. Another great reason to read the book, right? Because you might thrive on that. You might really like to feel needed, Enneagram number 2, I like to feel needed. But I have to also know where those bounds are, where I can't help everybody, where I can't do everything for everybody, and to be okay with that.
Well, and I think it even creates trust with the other person too, when you say, hey, actually that is off limits time, like I need this time for myself, or hey, it sounds like you're having a really bad day, but I just don't have the space right now to help you process this. And then the other person knows, first of all, that you still care about them, and second of all, that they're not going to overwhelm you. You know what I mean? Like sometimes you're like, ooh, is it too much to talk to this person or ask them a question? And the first time someone comes back to you with, hey, I need some space right now, and you know that they're going to tell you if that happens, and you don't have to worry about it anymore. I don't know. I think there's a lot of benefit.
Absolutely, because they're modeling healthy boundaries, right? So then it's being shown, like, they've been there for me so much, I have to be there for them. But if somebody is like, well, you know what, tonight's actually family night. I really promised my kids I was going to be there for this. And the other thing to that I would say is, we tend to say, I'm sorry I can't. And if we can change that just a little bit to just, thank you for thinking of me, thank you for trusting me with this. You know what, this is not a good night for me, but thank you for considering me in this, and the next time I will absolutely be there. And it's just changing things around that way too, which can be really helpful. But I love that. It's a great point, Dustin, a great point, because then you're modeling healthy boundaries, and you're modeling that, and you're teaching them that they can say no too, because saying no is not a bad thing.
I actually heard a podcast with I think it was Henry Townsend talking about boundaries, and he was saying you don't even have to justify the no. Like, you can say no without saying the reason why you're saying no, that you can say no in a kind and loving way to set the boundary, but you don't have to even justify saying that too, which I thought was freeing, because sometimes you do feel like you have to say no because I'm da-da-da-da-da, and you don't really have to do that, and that can also be a healthy way of setting the boundary too.
And I've heard the example, when you say no, it's not saying my life is so jam-packed right now, but it's saying I'm not going to allow my life to get so jam-packed right now. And that's healthy too. So there can be a lot of health and good things and good modeling to say no. And yeah, you don't have to justify it, you know. And I'm sorry. No, you don't have to be sorry.
Right.
It's okay. It's okay. You have to have your own space.
So I would say too, if you're reaching out to someone who says, hey, you know, no, I can't right now, that's not a forever no either.
Right.
Because I think that's an important distinction to make. If
Yes.
somebody says, if you're reaching out to someone and someone like says, I can't do this today, don't stop reaching out to that person.
Right.
That's not a, like, I'm never available for you, right?
Right. That's
Yeah.
that's black and white thinking.
Yeah.
And we can't do black and white thinking. We can't be all or nothing. We don't live in an all or nothing world. There is gray.
Yeah.
And it's okay.
Yeah.
You know, and I love that. That's so great. Just because they're saying no right now doesn't mean no forever.
Yeah.
And not to take that personally. And that can be hard.
Yes.
That can be hard.
Especially if you're in crisis.
Yes. And if you really are in crisis, I would hope that that person who is saying, you know, I can't be there for you right now, but let's find somebody.
Yes.
You know, if you are in crisis, you do need to have somebody. But that's also a really good idea of the importance of community. We're not saying get your very best friend and cling to them forever, right? Have community. You know, have the people, not just one. Have
Yes.
a group. Because the other thing is some people can get burnt out. But when you have a community, you have these people who can come together and say, man, so-and-so's having a really hard time. We're going to take care of their meals this week.
Yes.
So-and-so's having a hard time. We're going to take their kids. We're going to take turns doing that.
Yes.
The community, that's really the
sharing.
way that God set it up, that we have this family. And you know, in Psalms, there's a verse that says, you know, God sets the solitary in families. And I love that, which means He knows. He knows that you're hurting. And He knows your group. You just have to kind of seek Him out a little bit.
Yeah.
But He's in the midst of that.
Yeah. And that's His model for the church too in Acts,
Yes.
where they're breaking bread together and they're sharing in everything.
Yes.
And that's doing, I think, true community together too. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a great healthy example. Yeah.
I'm gonna check and see if we have any questions from
Yeah.
anyone watching. If you have
Sure.
a question, put it up on
Yes,
the
please.
Facebook Live, and we will answer it here. But Carrie, is there anything else you want to talk about to help kind of wrap up our class?
You know, I'm really thankful to be in a church that is so willing to touch on a hard subject. And this is a hard subject. It is a hard subject. It's one that even in 2020 there's stigma around.
Yeah.
And what I think the thing that Eastern Hills is wanting to do is say, we're getting rid of the stigma. We all have stuff. So let's dive in this together. So just because the Numb series is wrapping up, and I'm really sad about it, doesn't mean that this is where it stops. Doesn't mean that we're going, nope, you know, you're on your own now. That's not it at all. So let's get into the action phase here. Let's really start working on these things, and to just know this is the starting point. This is step one.
Yeah.
And we're in this, and we're in this together. And if you're not in this with somebody, we're going to help you find your people.
Yeah.
We're going to help you get connected, and just know that, yeah, the series might be over, and Carrie's heart's probably broken, but it's okay, because we're still going to be in this conversation. This is not something that we're ending. This is something that we're just beginning, and we want everyone to know we're there for you, we're praying for you. Get involved in the next thing, because this is not the end of mental health. This is the end of the series. This is the beginning of us maintaining our mental health in a godly way.
Yeah.
That's so good.
That's great. And I just want to thank Carrie for taking time to be with us over the last 4 weeks. Dustin and I were saying, like, we've been able to have therapy with all of you watching us, which has been great. But it's been so helpful for me, and conversations that I've been having with people, and the ways that I've thought about things. And so I'm so grateful to have had this time with you. And I just want to thank you for taking that time to be with us and to share your wisdom with us, and for just loving us and all of the people out there so well.
Yeah.
Well, definitely a pleasure, guys. Definitely
Yeah.
a pleasure. I've had a blast. So wonderful. Hit me up for the next one.
Yeah. Yeah.
Awesome, and thank you guys for joining us tonight. We'll stick around for a little while afterwards if you want to message in for questions. We will, of course, be monitoring the page and the messages that come in. But we are just so grateful for you taking time to join us for this journey. We are hoping that you have found some practical things to get yourself to a healthier place mentally. And please don't hesitate to reach out to us with any needs for resources, or if you're interested in our soul care class or our financial peace class, or if you would like to connect in a community group. We would be happy to help you take those steps to get connected and find your people so that you can take those action steps and you can maintain a healthier mental you. All right.
Yep.
Thanks for joining us.
Have a great night.
Have a great night.